The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of Terminal B like honey. Outside, planes lifted into the winter sky, their silver wings catching the light. Inside, hundreds of people rushed past with rolling suitcases and coffee cups, heading to places near and far. In the middle of all that noise and hurry stood a woman who moved differently than everyone else. Her name was Lucille O'Neill, though nobody in that crowded airport knew it. She wore a simple blue coat, not fancy or new, and comfortable shoes that had walked many miles. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, and her brown eyes held a kindness that came from years of caring for others. She carried only one small bag. Lucille walked up to the airline counter with quiet hope in her heart. "Good morning," she said softly to the young woman behind the desk. The name tag read Jennifer. Jennifer barely looked up from her computer screen. Her fingers clicked away on the keyboard. "Flight number?" "Flight 428 to Atlanta," Lucille said. "I was wondering if I could use my travel points to upgrade to first class. I've been saving them for a while now." Jennifer's eyes finally lifted, but they weren't warm. They scanned Lucille from head to toe, taking in the modest coat and the worn bag. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Ma'am, first class is reserved for our premium passengers," Jennifer said, her voice sharp like scissors cutting paper. "All the seats are sold out anyway." Lucille's shoulders dropped just a little, just enough that you'd notice if you were paying attention. But she kept her voice steady. "I understand. I just thought with the points I collected over the years." "The system shows you don't qualify," Jennifer interrupted, turning back to her screen. "Next in line, please." Lucille stepped aside, her heart heavy. She'd worked 2 jobs for 30 years to raise her children. She'd stood in long lines at grocery stores with coupons. She'd mended clothes instead of buying new ones. Those travel points represented every business trip she'd taken for work, every mile she'd flown to visit family. They meant something to her, but she didn't argue. She never did. That wasn't her way. As Lucille walked toward her gate, dragging her small bag behind her, something strange began to happen. 2 women sitting near the coffee shop leaned close to each other, whispering. "That's her," one said, eyes wide. "That's Shaq's mother." "No way. The basketball player? Are you sure? I saw her in a magazine article once. She raised him and his brothers all by herself." The whispers spread like ripples in water. A man in a business suit glanced up from his phone. A teenager nudged her father and pointed. Soon, a dozen people were stealing looks at the quiet woman in the blue coat, the one who'd just been turned away from first class. But Lucille didn't notice. She found a hard plastic chair near gate 17 and sat down with a sigh. Through the big window beside her, she watched planes taxi down the runway. She thought about her son, about how proud she was of everything he'd become, not because of the money or the fame, but because he'd stayed kind, because he remembered where he came from. She didn't know that at that very moment, her son was in that same airport. Shaquille O'Neal, the man the whole world called Shaq, walked through Terminal A wearing dark sunglasses and a pulled-down baseball cap. At 7 feet tall, he was impossible to miss, but he kept his head low. He'd learned tricks over the years to blend in, at least a little bit. He was supposed to be in Los Angeles for a meeting, but he'd canceled it 3 days ago. Today was special. Today, he was flying home to surprise his mama for her birthday. He bought her favorite flowers and a gift he knew would make her cry happy tears. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text message from Marcus, his childhood friend who worked at the airport. "Your mom's having trouble at gate 17. That airline clerk was rude to her, denied her an upgrade. Thought you should know." Shaq stopped walking so fast that the man behind him nearly crashed into him. His jaw tightened. His hands became fists. Behind those dark sunglasses, his eyes went hard as stones. Nobody, and he meant nobody, treated his mama with disrespect. He changed direction immediately, his long legs eating up the distance between terminals. His heart pounded, not from walking fast, but from the protective fire burning in his chest. His mama had given up everything for him and his siblings. She'd worked until her hands hurt. She'd gone without so they could have. and some airline worker had dismissed her like she was nothing? Not today. Not ever. As Shaq moved to a crowded airport, people began to recognize him despite the disguise. Phones came out. Voices rose in excitement. But he didn't stop for photos. He didn't smile and wave. His face was set with purpose. "That's Shaq," someone yelled. "He looks angry," another person whispered. The crowd parted around him like the Red Sea. Everyone could feel the energy rolling off him. Protective, powerful, and heading somewhere with absolute certainty. Gate 17 was just ahead, and Shaquille O'Neal was about to remind everyone in that airport that some things in life matter more than money, more than fame, more than anything else in the world. Some things, like the dignity of the woman who raised you, are worth fighting for. The question hanging in the air as he approached wasn't if something was about to happen. It was what would happen when a giant stood up for the person he loved most. And everyone was about to find out. Lucille sat by the window at Gate 17, her hands folded in her lap. She'd learned long ago that disappointment was just part of life. You felt it, you breathed through it, and you kept moving forward. That's what strong women did. But today, the disappointment felt heavier somehow. She watched a family nearby, a mother, father, and 2 small children. The little boy was pressing his face against a window, making foggy circles with his breath and drawing smiley faces in them. His sister giggled beside him. The parents looked tired but happy. Lucille smiled softly. She remembered those days, rushing through airports with kids in tow, juggling bags and snacks, and keeping everyone together. Those had been hard years, but they'd also been beautiful. She was so lost in her memories that she didn't notice the sudden change in the air around her. The noise level dropped. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. It was like someone had pressed a pause button on the whole gate area. Then she heard the whispers. "Is that? Oh my God, did I him? Shaq is here." Lucille's head turned, confusion on her face. And then she saw him. Her son, her baby boy who wasn't a baby anymore, who towered over everyone like a mountain in sneakers. He was walking straight toward her, and the look on his face made her heart skip. "Shaquille?" she said, standing up quickly. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in—" "Mama," he said, and his voice was gentle when he spoke to her, even though his eyes were still hard behind those sunglasses. He pulled them off and looked down at her. "I heard what happened at the counter. I heard how they treated you." Lucille's face flushed. "Oh, baby, it's nothing. It's just—" "It's not nothing," Shaq said firmly. He took her hand in his, and his huge hand swallowed hers completely. "Where's the person who turned you away?" "Shaquille, please. I don't want any trouble." "There won't be trouble, Mama, but there will be respect." Behind the counter at Gate 17, Jennifer had gone pale. She recognized him now. Everyone did, and suddenly, pieces were falling into place in her mind. That older woman in the modest coat, the woman she dismissed without a second thought, that was Shaquille O'Neal's mother. And everyone in the airport knew that Shaq had recently become a major investor in a new airline partnership. The news had been everywhere just 2 weeks ago. He wasn't just a celebrity passenger. He was practically part of the business. Jennifer's hands started to shake. A manager came rushing over, a man in a crisp suit with sweat already forming on his forehead. His name was Richard, and he'd seen the crowd gathering on the security cameras. "Mr. O'Neal," Richard said, his voice too loud, too eager. "What an honor. Is there something we can help you with?" Shaq looked at him, really looked at him. The kind of look that makes you feel small, even if you're standing up straight. "My mother," Shaq said slowly, "asked for an upgrade using her travel points. She's been a loyal customer for over 20 years. She was told no, not because there weren't seats available, but because she didn't look like she belonged in first class." The crowd around them had grown. Passengers pulled out phones. Some were recording. Others just watched with wide eyes. Richard stammered, I'm sure there was a misunderstanding. Jennifer, pull up Mrs. O'Neal's account immediately." Jennifer's fingers fumbled on the keyboard. "The system, there are actually 2 first-class seats available. I must have made a mistake." "You didn't make a mistake." said a quiet voice from the crowd. Everyone turned. An older gentleman stepped forward. He wore an expensive suit and carried a leather briefcase. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like someone's grandfather. "I heard what happened earlier," the man said. "I was standing 3 people behind this lady in line. You looked at her and decided she didn't matter. I saw it on your face." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak. The gentleman turned to Lucille. "Ma'am, I'm in seat 2A in first class. It's yours. I insist." The gate area went completely silent. Lucille's eyes went wide. "Oh, no, I couldn't possibly." "Please," the man said, and his voice cracked just a little. "My mother passed away last year. She was a lot like you, proud, dignified, didn't ask for much. People overlooked her all the time because she wasn't flashy. I didn't stand up for her enough when she was here. Let me do this. For her memory. And for you." Tears rolled down Lucille's cheeks. She pressed a hand to her heart. The crowd erupted in applause. It started with 1 person clapping, then 2, then 20, then everyone. The sound filled the gate area like thunder. Some people were crying. Others were smiling so wide their faces hurt. Shaq's jaw unclenched. His shoulders relaxed. He looked at the gentleman and extended his massive hand. "Thank you," Shaq said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," the man said simply. Richard, the manager, was frantically typing on a tablet. "Mrs. O'Neill, please let us also upgrade your son to first class, and we'll refund your ticket entirely. And we'd like to offer you both travel vouchers worth." Shaq held up his hand. "Stop." Richard froze. "This man," Shaq said, gesturing to the gentleman in the suit, "showed my mother more respect in 2 minutes than your airline showed her all morning. He's the hero here, not you scrambling to fix things because you got caught." The crowd murmured in agreement. Shaq looked at Jennifer, who was now openly crying behind the counter, but his voice wasn't cruel when he spoke. It was firm, but not mean. "You made a choice today based on how someone looked instead of how they deserved to be treated. My mama taught me that every single person, rich or poor, famous or unknown, deserves dignity. I hope you'll remember that." Jennifer nodded, unable to speak. Richard cleared his throat. "Mr. O'Neill, I promise you, we'll be implementing new training for all our staff. This will never happen again." "Make sure it doesn't," Shaq said. "Not just for famous people's families. For everyone. Especially for elderly passengers who've been loyal customers for decades." "Yes, sir. Absolutely." The crowd began boarding. The gentleman in the suit insisted on carrying Lucille's bag. Shaq walked beside his mother, one protective hand on her shoulder. Passengers smiled at them. Some reached out to shake Shaq's hand. Others just nodded with respect. At the entrance of the plane, Lucille turned to her son. "You didn't have to make such a fuss," she said softly, but she was smiling. "Yes, I did, Mama," Shaq said, and he kissed the top of her head. "You taught me to stand up for what's right. You think I'm going to let someone disrespect a woman who made me who I am?" She squeezed his hand, and together they walked onto the plane, where an adventure in dignity was just beginning. The question wasn't whether this moment would change things. It was how far the ripples of kindness would spread. The first-class cabin smelled like leather and fresh coffee. Soft music played quietly from hidden speakers. The seats were wide and comfortable, wrapped in cream-colored fabric that looked like it had never been sat on before. Lucille settled into seat 2A by the window, her hands running gently over the armrests. She'd flown hundreds of times in her life, but always in the back of the plane, squeezed between strangers with her knees pressed against the seat in front of her. This was different. This felt like floating on a cloud. The gentleman who'd given up a seat sat across the aisle in Shaq's upgraded seat. He'd insisted that Shaq sit beside his mother. "She needs you more than I need legroom," he'd said with a wink. Shaq folded his enormous frame into seat 2B. Even in first class, his knees barely fit. But he didn't care. He was exactly where he needed to be. A flight attendant approached, a young woman with a kind smile. Her name tag read Sarah. "Mrs. O'Neill," Sarah said warmly. "Can I get you anything?" Water? Juice? A warm towel. Lucille looked surprised. You know my name? Everyone on this plane knows your name now, Sarah said gently. And if I may say so, what happened at the gate was wrong. You handled it with more grace than most people would have. Lucille's eyes misted. Thank you, sweetheart. Sarah leaned in closer and whispered, My grandmother raised me by herself, too. She worked 3 jobs. People looked right through her like she was invisible. I saw a little bit of her in you today. Thank you for reminding me to call her tonight. As Sarah walked away, Lucille turned to her son. Shaq was watching her with those big brown eyes, the same eyes that used to look up at her when he was a little boy asking for one more bedtime story. You okay, Mama? He asked softly. I'm better than okay, baby, she said, taking his huge hand in both of hers. But I need you to understand something. Shaq leaned closer. I didn't need you to fight my battles today, Lucille said. I've been fighting my own battles my whole life. I'm strong enough. I know you are, Mama. I know. But, she continued, and her voice got softer. It sure felt good to know somebody had my back. It felt good to know my son loves me enough to stand up and speak out. Not because I'm weak, but because I matter to you. Shaq's eyes got wet. You're the most important person in my world. Always have been. Always will be. She patted his cheek. That's all a mother ever wants to hear. Around them, other passengers were settling in. A businesswoman in seat 4. She kept glancing over at Lucille and Shaq. Finally, she stood up and walked over. Excuse me, she said nervously. I just wanted to say, I work in customer service. I manage a team of 50 people. After watching what happened today, I'm going back to my office and changing how we train everyone. What that clerk did to you was wrong. And what you did, she looked at Shaq, reminded me why respect matters more than rules. Thank you, Lucille said simply. The woman nodded and returned to her seat, pulling out her phone to type notes to herself. An older man across the aisle leaned over. I've flown first class 200 times, he said. Never once did I think about who might deserve this seat more than me. Today I learned something. One by one, passengers came by, not for autographs, not for selfies. They came to tell Lucille she mattered. They came to say they'd seen what happened, and it had changed something inside them. A teenager with purple streaks, and her hair stopped by. My mom works 2 jobs like you did, she said shyly. Nobody ever treats her special. I'm going to do something nice for her when I get home. Maybe surprise her with flowers. Lucille smiled so wide her whole face lit up. She's going to love that. Honey. The plane's engines rumbled to life. The captain's voice came over the speaker. Good afternoon, folks. Before we take off, I want to acknowledge something special that happened at our gate today. Sometimes we get so caught up in policies and procedures that we forget the human beings we're serving. Mrs. O'Neill, on behalf of this entire crew, I apologize for how you were treated. And I promise you, things are going to change. The cabin erupted in applause again. Lucille closed her eyes and let the moment wash over her. She thought about all the years of struggle, all the time she'd been dismissed, overlooked, ignored, all the time she'd held her head high anyway, because that's what her own mother had taught her. Maybe today would make a difference. Maybe that clerk, Jennifer, would think twice before judging someone by their appearance. Maybe that manager would actually change the training. Maybe these passengers would carry this lesson with them and treat others better. Or maybe they wouldn't. But Lucille knew one thing for certain. She'd raised a son who knew right from wrong. A son who used his size and his fame and his voice to protect people who couldn't always protect themselves. That was worth more than any first-class seat. The plane lifted into the sky, rising above the clouds into brilliant sunshine. Shaq reached into his bag and pulled out a small wrapped box. I was going to wait until we got home, but happy birthday, Mama. Lucille gasped. You remembered. I always remember. She unwrapped the box carefully, saving the paper like she always did. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with an engraving. The strongest woman I know. Love, Shaquille. Tears streamed down her face. Oh, baby, it's perfect. He helped her put it on, his giant fingers surprisingly gentle with the tiny clasp. "You know what the best part today was?" Lucille said, looking out the window at the clouds below. "What's that?" "That gentleman who gave up his seat. He didn't do it because you're famous. He did it because it was right. That's the kind of goodness that really changes the world. Random acts of kindness from people nobody's watching." Shaq nodded. "You taught me that. You've been doing random acts of kindness your whole life. And now you do them too. That makes me prouder than anything else you've ever accomplished." The flight continued peacefully. Passengers read books, watched movies, dozed off. But there was a different feeling in that cabin. A gentleness, a shared understanding that they'd all witnessed something meaningful. When the plane finally landed in Atlanta, something unusual happened. As passengers stood to gather their bags, they started clapping. Not for the pilots, though they'd done a great job. Not for the flight attendants, though they'd been wonderful. They were clapping for Lucille. She stood there, tiny and humble in her blue coat, and she smiled. Not a big, showy smile, just a quiet, grateful smile that said she understood what this meant. One person at a time, passengers stopped to shake her hand or give her a gentle hug as they filed past. The businessman in the expensive suit, the teenager with purple hair, the grandmother with the cane. All of them changed somehow by what they'd seen. Later that evening, Lucille sat in her living room at home. The silver bracelet caught the lamplight and sparkled on her wrist. Shaq had gone to pick up dinner, her favorite barbecue from the place she'd been going to for 30 years. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah, the flight attendant. "I called my grandmother. We talked for 2 hours. Thank you for inspiring me. You matter more than you know." Lucille smiled and typed back, "You matter too, sweetheart. Never forget that." She thought about the day, the disappointment at the counter, the anger she'd seen flash across her son's face, the stranger's unexpected kindness, the applause, the tears, the lessons learned. It hadn't been about the seat at all. It had been about something bigger, something that couldn't be bought or upgraded or reserved for premium passengers. Dignity, respect, the simple act of seeing another human being and treating them like they matter. Lucille had carried that lesson her whole life. Today, she'd pass it on to a plane full of strangers. And those strangers would pass it on to others. And those others would pass it on again, like ripples in water, spreading out forever. When Shaq came home with bags of food, he found his mother standing by the window, looking out at the stars. "Penny for your thoughts, Mama," he said. She turned to him, and her face glowed with a peaceful happiness. "I was just thinking," she said, "that maybe the world's a little bit better tonight than it was this morning. And if we keep making it a little bit better, day by day, person by person, kindness by kindness, well, that's how you change everything." Shaq wrapped his arms around her in a hug that lifted her off the ground. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, baby. Now put me down and let's eat before this food gets cold." They laughed together, and somewhere in that laughter was a sound of a lesson learned, a dignity defended, and a love that could move mountains, or at least fill a first-class cabin with hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to spread this message of dignity, respect, and kindness. You never know who needs to hear it today. Every share is a ripple of goodness, reaching someone who needs to remember that they matter. Let's change the world together, one act of kindness at a time.